order at 12:01. And roll call, let's see, Commissioner Clyde Church.
Here.
Commissioner Shattuck McNally. I don't see Commissioner Shattuck McNally. She might join later. We'll keep an eye out. Kirk Will did email me that he might be late or unable to join today. Brett Wolk.
Hello.
Hello. John Ring. Hi, John.
Hello.
Katie McGrath Novak.
Here.
Hi, Katie. Selwyn White Skunk. Do we have Selwyn on? Doesn't look like it. Julie Stencil. Okay. Courtney, do we have a quorum?
One moment.
Sure.
Yes, we do.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Let's see. And then I think I got all the members. I know Courtney usually helped me out with roll call, but if I missed anyone, let me know. Just interrupt me. For minutes, we don't have any minutes to approve today. So things have just been busy and haven't been able to get those out to folks to review. So we'll get those out shortly and approve them at the next meeting. Does that sound good, Courtney?
Yeah, thanks for everyone's patience.
Yeah, no worries. It's not a big deal. And then we have a very special guest joining us today. So we want to make sure we allow time for the presentation. So Brett, I'll turn it over to you just for a general update on the Forest Tracker and maybe just some background and information for folks on the subcommittee to prepare for the presentation and kind of get their minds thinking about how it relates to the work that we're all doing. So I'll turn it over to you, Brett.
All right, thanks. And I see Commissioner Shattuck McNally joined us too, it looks like.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, excited for today. I'll try and be brief, although if there's any questions that you all have about the Forest Tracker, happy to answer them. So we have sort of launched a call for data for our Forest Tracker to compile all of the forest management activities that are happening across all lands in Colorado. Again, with a lot of the federal data on management of federal lands, we can download those from their internal federal databases that are publicly available. But this call is really for all of the state and non-federal private lands, other land ownerships, tribal lands, things like that, that aren't in federal databases. So that's what we're sort of doing right now. And the initial call for data, we were hoping to close it before Thanksgiving. We've had 17 different organizations that have submitted data so far. And they've used a mix of sending us a geodatabase. We have a form where you can actually draw individual polygons and submit the information if you don't have a lot of GIS experience, or just email and other ways of sending us data. So we provided lots of options. It's good to see people are using all those options or getting different kinds of data to make sure we get it from different people. And through this process, we're continuing to have lots of communication with folks about, you know, hey, are you going to submit some data? What are your barriers to submitting data? What's your interest in this? And gaining a lot of knowledge just about how it's working and things like that. That lots of excitement still, varying levels of capacity from the different agencies and organizations to organize and compile and send their data. So I think generally positive. Yeah, I think one ask that I have from the council is to keep considering how the council, and I think after this call and our call with the Utah WRI from last month and other things, we're learning about what other states are doing, how this council wants to leverage things like the Forest Tracker to help, you know, inform future policy and investments from this legislature and governor, because that's our mission. So I think as you're learning more, I don't know if it looks like an official like letter to say we will use the data in some way. I don't think we're ready to tie the council to using it in any particular way. So a letter might be tricky. But something that we might be able to use as a hook to have people recognize the importance and value of them contributing data. So I'm also interested to hear Alan's perspective and how they're approaching that in California too. So that's kind of the update on the forest tracker and sort of where it's at right now. We're still getting enough data that we're hoping to be able to move forward with it this spring. It will take a lot more individual outreach to individual people. So we've developed more strategies, and State Forest Service can speak up more on this, but leveraging their networks more because they have field offices and people all over the state on the ground in connection, pushing messages out about the importance, how to submit any kind of technical support to remove some of those barriers, things like that. So going out through their channels of communication through their 4 areas in the state and the science and data people and field offices and stuff like that. As well as CFRI helping as well with our networks and just calling people, asking for their data. That's kind of where we're at. So any questions on the forest tracker? And then I'll kind of introduce Alan and we'll hear from him. Go ahead, Clyde.
Yeah, just wondering, are you getting response back from private landowners that have federal and state grants? Is that where most of the contact work needs to go, or?
No, I think we're trying to go a little bit more. So a lot of those federal and state grants are captured by the State Forest Service or the federal databases, right? And so our goal is not to go homeowner by homeowner and collect data.
Good.
It's more, you know, so in your area of the woods, you know, trying to get data from Wildfire Adaptive Partnership and things like that that have compiled all of those individual private landowner grants.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Brett? Katie.
I was just curious, Brett and the others who were on our branching out call, did you see much response as a result of branching out with getting collaboratives to submit their data?
Yeah, thanks for speaking up, Katie, because I didn't recognize how helpful and important you have been in the Forest Network in helping with our outreach strategy. So organize the webinar, but then also we work together to update your contact list of all the collaboratives across the state. And that's how we're trying to send out emails and reach people is Katie has a list of all the forest collaborative partners across the state. So that's a direct contact and a direct way to go about that. So thanks, Katie, for you and your network and all the help. Yeah, I've heard some feedback from the webinar. I've been able to share it with some people, which has been a useful resource. I don't know how much that moved the needle versus sending people emails or not. I think it'd be good maybe also we have the other sort of forest tracker kind of core team on here with the State Forest Service and CFRI. Maybe if you could take a second, introduce yourself, Nick, Rebecca, Stephanie, Amanda, I see you're on here if you want to say hi. Just introduce yourself real quick and share any insights or thoughts you've had about as we're developing the forest tracker and how it's going.
Yeah.
What we could get from the Forest Health Council, how they could help us.
Yeah, so hey everybody, my name is Nick Kotlinski. I'm the Geospatial Data and Analysis Program Manager at Colorado State Forest Service. Katie, the webinar was not, I don't think as well as attended as we had hoped, but it gave us some great contacts. We did get some data sets directly because of that webinar, so that was super positive. And then I think that's where we had the most people using the different submission methods while they were going through the webinar. And then, as Brett said, he reconfigured your list and we broke it out by our State Forest Service areas and sent that to our supervisory science and data foresters in those areas to basically ask them to do more targeted outreach for those collaboratives and those groups. And we have a follow-up meeting. We have our monthly collaboration call with those folks tomorrow. So I'll get a sense of how many people they've been able to reach out to. And I know that some foresters have been great and kind of just going out and doing presentations on their own, even without my prompting, because they knew about the webinar and they knew about the project. But then, we're getting kind of the feedback from folks that we don't have the capacity to do it right now because of competing deadlines, or we don't have technical staff, which, we are trying to support folks in that way with the Survey 123 submission, where you can just draw a polygon, or basically saying just email us and we will walk you through it. But I think that still is a time commitment that's tough to get people to commit to right now for our first year. Hopefully maybe year 2, people will get even more excited with the products that we do release and folks seeing that their name isn't in there. But yeah, I think just, I don't know what would be helpful for this group to kind of help us continue doing outreach. We have a list of who's contributed already and a list of folks who we want to reach out to, and it's just time and capacity to get all those names and also wrangle their data in a pretty short amount of time. I'll stop talking.
Cool.
I'm Rebecca. I'm with Colorado State Forest Service. I'm a GIS specialist. And my experience is I've been more working with the specific data sets with the individual submissions. So I've seen less of the overall submission reasons. It's been helpful to work with some of the individual collaboratives or organizations to see some of the barriers. I think some of the organizations, some of the confusion about what we would like to submit and why. So again, as Nick mentioned, I think it might be easier in year 2 as the word gets out that we're not asking for the world. It's still quite a bit of data to assemble, but that I'm there, Stephanie's there. We have people on the ground that are willing and would like to help. So if we can connect, then we can provide a significant amount of support. Additionally, I wanted to add that I think the webinar was really helpful, but that also we had some unfortunate technical events. I think that's when CSU had the power outage. And so there are a couple other things that I think may have contributed to lower viewership than would have happened otherwise.
Hi, and I'm Stephanie Mueller. I'm a spatial analyst at CFRI. I'm more working at the federal data as this project. So we can download facts, we can download the BLM data now. It's just a matter of trying to crosswalk those in an effective and easy way. So I'm not really involved in the other submissions, so I don't have any insights there. But federal data is a lot to work with by itself. So.
Yeah, and big thanks to John Ring and the BLM and also U.S. Forest Service for being super helpful and helping wrangle their data as well. So that's kind of where we're at. Yeah, I think as we said, in year 2, once people see the data, I think they'll want to get more involved, but also that's a role for the council as we see the data as a council and think about the power of, if it was more complete, how would we use it to help inform decisions? I think that's going to be a really big hook for people to do it that could help everyone do exactly what this committee says of leveraging resources better together. So that's the hope.
Oh, go ahead, Katie.
I was just wondering, as far as like writing a letter, I agree. I feel like maybe there's not a super solid thing we could write a letter about, but I do wonder if we could just put out like we're really excited about this statement, and or if there's a way to incorporate this into the forest resilience planning guide planning process. That seems like a concrete thing that we could say, like, we're going to reference this for XYZ purposes.
Mm-hmm.
Because I agree. I think people are really excited about the Forest Health Council, and getting that stamp on there could maybe give it a little boost.
I think just having a tangible place where we say this data will be used to inform decisions, and really to get you the right, in order to know if we, the more we know about the work that you're doing on the ground and how that's interacting with wildfires or other things, other data in that area, the more that we know, the more that the state and other people will be able to get you the right resources to do the right kind of work. It's not about like choosing one or the other. It's different people need different kinds of resources, but we need more data to know how to leverage the right resources in the right way. So that's saying something along those lines, but yeah, I appreciate that, Katie.
Yeah, I think hopefully there'll be, I can work with Courtney, Brett, and include you on those conversations. But I think we're having a meeting in January, the whole Forest Health Council. So it would be good to maybe just talk about that, just have some time on the agenda to talk about either doing a letter or the council showing our support. But just having that discussion with the council. I think for the legislative committee too, it would be beneficial, for just showcasing the accomplishments in the state. So I think that, yeah, it's definitely worth a discussion. So I'll work with Courtney on hopefully getting some time on the agenda. Does that sound good for the January Forest Council meeting?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. And I think actually maybe that's a good transition to Alan.
Yeah.
To hear about the California treatment dashboard and how they're using it to inform decisions on California programs.
Awesome. Well, Alan, welcome, and thank you so much for joining today and offering your time and just expertise and knowledge in this area of tracking these projects and accomplishments. And so I don't want to waste any more time. So I'll turn it over to you if you're able to share your screen and then, yeah, however you want to manage the presentation. If you want it to be more interactive, let us know. If you want to hold questions till the end, we can do that too, but just want to make it the best for you. So just let us know.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, good. Google Meet is not my native teleconferencing platform, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit here.
Totally. You're doing great. Yeah, I get the Google Meet issue. Yeah, we have the same with Denver Water, so.
Yeah. Yeah, so welcome. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk to you about California's efforts to do treatment tracking. It's exciting to hear your progress, and a lot of the conversation that I was just listening to you have sounded similar to conversations and efforts that we've had in California. And actually last week I was at a meeting with a bunch of folks from the state of Washington, Department of Natural Resources, and they have a treatment tracker as well. And we had conversations about how sort of parallel our processes have been around treatment tracking, but also other sort of collaborative planning, and getting projects on the ground and things like that, prioritization, lots of fun stuff. So there's other states that are out there doing the same thing. We're fairly far along in California, but it was interesting to talk to Washington and see some of the other places that they're ahead of us even. So I'm here in a couple of capacities. One is I'm Assistant Deputy Director for Climate and Energy at CAL FIRE, and I oversee lots of grant programs, just sort of depending on the level of funding we have, like $100 to $200 million a year of grants for forest health, tribal wildfire resilience, reforestation, business and workforce development, those programs. And then I'm also a member, and have been a member for a while, of California's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. I lead a work group there that's just focused on science and data and other things like that. The task force as a whole dates back to 2021, but this is kind of like our third iteration of a task force in California, dating back to around 2015 when we had a really big spike in tree mortality caused by drought in the Sierra Nevada. So the original iteration of the task force was just focused on tree mortality, and then it got into forest management was the next version, and now we're in wildfire and forest resilience. The task force is co-chaired by the state Secretary of Natural Resources and the regional forester for Region 5, which covers all of California and Hawaii, and it has some membership from different state agencies, local governments, and tribes as well. The task force is really focusing on implementing this Wildfire First Resilience Action Plan, which is very similar to the federal wildfire strategy that just got released. We kind of think we're maybe a forerunner. There are about 100 different actions in our action plan, which is pretty comprehensive, from things that you could do on the community level to science and data things to landscape processes and things like that. High level, we have a couple of goals that actually go back to an MOU, shared stewardship agreement with the Forest Service several years ago, that the state is trying to reach a goal of treating 500,000 acres per year by 2025. And that would be matched by the Forest Service treating 500,000 acres on their lands by 2025, and some extra acres thrown in from Department of Interior entities like the BLM and the Park Service. If you want to go know more about the task force in general, what we do, wildfiretaskforce.org is our website that we use. You can look at the treatment tracker and other things like that we have there. Lots of other resources available for you there. Specifically with treatment tracking, we had a few goals. Assemble federal, state, local, private data to support transparency. There's a lot of funding from the state of California and other folks that are going into these efforts. We want people to be able to see, where all that funding is going. We want to be able to facilitate planning and support fire suppression operations. So facilitate planning is being able to understand where your neighbors are putting treatments on the ground, on the landscape level, so you could see where local government is doing work, or state or the feds. And then also we have the goal of getting these data into the hands of firefighters so they can use it as part of their operational responses. We want to provide enough data to assess the benefits and costs of what we're doing, sort of beyond just how many acres are we treating. So are we treating the right acres? What kind of environmental impacts are we having on watersheds, on biodiversity, on carbon, other things like that. And then, of course, we want to be able to track progress towards that 1 million acres, the 500,000 from state and 500,000 from the feds as well. And this treatment tracking sort of fits into an ecosystem of different science and data products that the task force is developing. So the data from the treatment tracking system feeds into a few different spots. One is these regional resource kits. So the task force has broken up the state into 4 distinct regions. We have pretty different regions in the state of California, ranging from, the redwoods in the Northwest to, Southern California, which is largely shrublands, chaparral, coastal sage scrub, things like that. So we realize we need to take very different regional approaches. And these regional resource kits are spatial data layers that can be used by local planners, regional planners on the ground to help them understand the current conditions in their part of the state, ranging from sort of forest inventory data and other sort of biological data to things like socioeconomic data as well, that they can use to help plan and prioritize treatments. The next place this is feeding in is some scenario modeling that's actually ongoing right now. So we have this goal of 1 million acres, and we're trying to figure out like where that should go out on the landscape, and what the different costs and benefits of doing the different arrangements of those 1 million acres and different types of activities and mixtures of activities in that 1 million acres, what that could look like. And then the next product is a monitoring and evaluation system, which is it's coming in on the back end and saying, okay, we funded all these treatments happened. What actually impact are we having on the landscape, on fire dynamics, on biodiversity, et cetera, et cetera. And then a few of those different things are getting fed into this tool called Planscape. And that is a tool that is allows you to weight and prioritize different factors and helps you figure out where on the landscape, if you were a forest supervisor or something like that, where you should put your treatments on the landscape. And that was Originally supported by the nonprofit arm of Google, came to the state and said, we have this capacity. How would you like to realize this capacity? And so they sent some fellows to work with the California Natural Resources Agency to help develop the software for this. It's still being built. I think it's taken them a bit longer, to be honest, than they thought it would take. But they are testing it right now and building it in phases. But we hope that's be a good like public open access tool to supplement some of the existing like private tools that you can pay to use to do this type of planning for you. So within the tracking system, we have a number of different data sources, including some of the ones that you just mentioned. You know, we're pulling data from the Forest Service and BLM and other federal sources as well. We have a lot of data sets on different state agencies that are doing land management work. And from like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, state parks, California has a number of different conservancies that help support land management in different areas of the state. CAL FIRE, my organization, has our own mapping system for our work that we do. We're not actually a large landowner within the state. We do have some demonstration state forests around the state, but largely the work that we do is support work on private land. And then also we have a database from the California Department of Transportation on all the roadside vegetation management that they're doing, which is actually a pretty tremendous amount of work that they're doing across the state. And then we also have some regulatory sources of data that we're pulling in. Some stuff on prescribed fire from our Air Resources Board. We have a data set from our Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, which works with the electric utilities in the state and has a very comprehensive database of all of their vegetation management that they're doing along their infrastructure. And then we have some other data sets. One thing that we don't have actually right now is a good spatial data on timber harvest, and we can talk about that later, more down the line. In the future, we hope to add that in, as well as data on tribes and what local governments and NGOs are doing sort of outside of the work that they're doing that's funded via the state or federal government. So right now we've pulled all this together in a dashboard. Right now, sort of as a beta version, the dashboard only covers the calendar year of 2022. It only covers sort of active and complete treatments and acres of work that are getting done. We aspire to have things like planned acres in here as well, so that people can see what's coming down the line in their area. And we have data from the state, the federal government, and some timber industry data, which I'll talk about later. So this is a mock-up of our dashboard. You can see like across the top, there's a place where you can learn more, and that'll take you to a website where you can download documentation, like methods and other things like that to see how we've done this. And then there's an activity tab and a footprint tab. This is the activity tab, and I'll talk about in a second what I mean by activity versus footprint. So it's divided up here. You can see there's a table for acres by reporting entity and like what category of activity is happening and like what the land ownership is, as well as a map. And there's this analogous footprint data set as well. What do I mean by footprint and activity data? Activity acres represent sort of the effort level that goes into treating the land. So you can think of, maybe you're doing a forest restoration treatment. In order to complete that treatment, you may need to enter that acre multiple times in order to get that work done. So maybe you come through once and do a thinning, and then maybe you come through again and pile all the residues, and then you come back and burn all those piles, and then maybe you come back a fourth time and do a broadcast burn across that same piece of land. So you've gone into that acreage 4 times in order to complete that one treatment. Whereas the footprint acres are really a measure of the geography of that treatment. So you'd only, instead of counting that space 4 times, you just count it once because that's the land that you're touching. In our discussions about this, we've decided that like both of these things are really important to communicate. The agencies that are doing the land management work really want people to understand how much work that they're doing on the landscape and the human resources that it takes to do that, the fiscal resources that it takes to do all that stuff, and just the time and the effort that, you know, they do need to go to these pieces of land 4 times, sometimes, or 3 times, or whatever, to get the work done. But then also we hear very clearly from public and other stakeholders that they really just want to know what does the geography that is actually being treated on the landscape. And they don't want to hear that you had to go to that land 4 times. They just want to know that that is the space that you did work. I have a couple of examples of like how this might work, like hypothetically. So maybe you have this red area here where it's a 70-acre treatment area. Maybe in the first year, you've only done 40 acres of work. You masticated that. There's another planned 30 acres that maybe just is going to happen in the next year or the next fiscal year. So here the activity is 40 acres and the footprint is 40 acres because you only actually touched 40 acres in that particular year. And you only did 40 acres of work. Whereas in the sort of yellow or gold unit, that's 200 acres total. You went once and thinned it, and then you came back and did a broadcast burn. So the activity there is 400 acres and the footprint is only 200 acres. I think I already talked about this for the most part, but I will point out that you can also, across the top here, there are different filters. So you could filter by federal work, or you could filter by state work or private. You can filter it by the different region of the task force or county or land ownership. Eventually you'd be able to filter by which year things happened in. Year has been an incredibly minor but very big sticking point in terms of how this work is communicated. The state of California has a different fiscal year than the federal fiscal year. And so state agencies, you know, came into this conversation saying our data are complete as of the end of the fiscal year. And the federal government also came into the conversation saying, well, our data are complete as of the end of the fiscal year, and we're sort of uncomfortable sharing data before the end of that. Which puts us, you know, in an awkward spot because, you know, when do we release our data? When do we, what do we show the public? Eventually, we knocked a bunch of heads together and came up with calendar year that made everyone equally unhappy. But I think that's also the best way, the most clear way to communicate it to the public as well, because they don't necessarily know what the federal fiscal year is or the state fiscal year. Let's see if this will work. This is a little live movie I had. So all these dashboard features are interactive. It's not just static. You can click on the different parts of the dashboard and it'll rearrange the data. So you can click on mechanical and hand fuels reduction and it filters the map and the other tables. You can click on the federal data and it'll show you what mix of things the federal government is doing. You can stack these filters on together. So it'll do CAL FIRE, prescribed fire, and you can see how that is shaking out across the landscape in different ways. You can expand these map panels to make them bigger or smaller, make them full screen. Like I said, there are different filters across the top. So you can click on state and it'll just filter to show the state work that's happening out there on the landscape. And you can also do the same thing by ownership. There are some additional map layers that you can turn on and off in the background to see land ownership or congressional district or legislative district, so that people can understand what's happening in their part of the state or overlaying it with their particular area of interest. I've mostly been showing you so far the points, but we do have polygons for all these things. So if you zoom in on the map, eventually those points become the actual outlines and boundaries of the treatments. You can see a lot of them are linear. That's the work that's happening along the roadsides. If you click on the points, a bunch of attributes show up to say who did the work, what kind of work was it, how many acres was it, when exactly was that work completed. You can see, we're going to zoom into one here in the Sierra Nevada foothills, and you can see there's actually a bunch of polygons that overlap, different treatments that happened in different time periods, different types of treatments. This was like mastication, and then there's a broadcast burn here and some chipping, all these things sort of overlapping in space within this one treatment area. So if you want to learn a little bit more, like I said, if you go to wildfiretaskforce.org, you can actually go to this dashboard yourself and play around with it. It's under resources in the top of the page. Also, there is some supporting documentation that shows our work, how we crosswalked from the Forest Service system to the CAL FIRE system to the Caltrans system and all the other data sets that we have. Our methods for doing this data processing, you can download the data as a geodatabase. If you want to analyze it and do whatever stuff that you want yourself, you can do that. It exists as a feature service, so if you want to scrape all the data yourself, you can do that. We also have an FAQ, which very prominently points out differences in our dashboard and tracking system versus some of the others that are out there. The Forest Service has several different dashboards. The state of California, CAL FIRE has its own dashboard. These are not the same. They all have little different focuses. They all have different things that they count or don't count, or different time periods that they cover. So we were trying to make it a little more straightforward for people who want to understand a little bit more about what exactly are they looking at in these data. I think that's all of the plan slides I had. I have a couple sitting in the background if we get to them, but happy to take questions now.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. That is super impressive. I'm sure there's lots of questions. So if folks unmute yourself, ask away, or raise your hand. I certainly have questions if people don't. Okay, well, while we're waiting on folks for questions, I have a lot. So one question is for the accomplishments, thinking about the treatment tracking metrics, doing more than just acres. That's kind of where I feel like we're stuck a little bit in trying to go above and beyond just acres treated, but how to quantify that. So I'm curious what your other metrics are that you use for just going beyond acres treated.
That's, I mean, we're still developing that to some extent, but that's, I don't think I'm not sure there will be a point where we're totally finished with that conversation, just to be honest. But that is one of the reasons that we wanted all of these data to be spatial and we wanted polygons for all this, is so that we could facilitate other analyses down the line. So it's really important that we treat the right acres. If we wanted to treat just acres, it would be really easy to go and burn off a bunch of grasslands. But that wouldn't necessarily help us. That grass would grow back the next year or two, and you'd be in more or less the same place that you were before. So we wanted to, like I said, have the data to sort of go beyond that and ask the question of how many WUI acres are we treating? How many actually forested acres are we treating? Are we treating acres in the right parts of the state? In Southern California, they're kind of uninterested in acres because that's not what they need there. They exist in an environment where they've had too much fire relative to historical norms in those types of ecosystems. And so it doesn't make sense to go do a bunch of thinning or mastication in the chaparral and those systems. What they're really concerned about is maybe some strategic fuel breaks, ignition prevention, home hardening, other things like that. So those are the metrics that I think we're going to be focusing on, sort of outside of this data set is those types of things with more things around community protection. An element of the task force that we have is there are work groups that are developing strategy documents for a number of different key areas. And we've released strategy documents around prescribed fire, or we're just actually calling it beneficial fire because it's inclusive of cultural fire and also wildfire managed resource benefit as well. So they have their own separate target for that document. There's a reforestation strategy, there is a recreation strategy, and then forthcoming is a fire adapted community strategy as well. And I expect that will have a number of metrics associated with it. But the state is also, very focused on water. We're very focused on biodiversity. and we're very focused on carbon. And so those are all metrics that we will be tracking, both sort of statewide and also at a finer scale. Carbon is a method that we have pretty well handled. It's an inventory. It's pretty straightforward. Air quality is also another metric that we're tracking very closely as well. And there are some methods to get around emissions fairly easily, or potential emissions from fire. Economic benefits is another thing that we're tracking. There was this document put together through one of our forest collaboratives in California called the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative. And they put together, trying to figure out the best word, sort of an assessment tool that's called the Pillars of Resilience, that tracks a number of these different metrics. And so there's these sort of high-level pillars that are all supported by a number of metrics that go into them, and these do include things like biodiversity, air quality, carbon, economic benefits, wildfire resilience, and so on and so forth. And so data to address those are supported in the regional resource kits that I mentioned before. They're supported in the Planscape tool, and they're going to be to the extent possible quantified in the scenario modeling that we're doing as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, especially with water, I'm continually trying to think about how to showcase the benefits to water. For Denver Water, we've used really it's sediment, like preventing sediment to reservoirs that's taking up, valuable storage capacity and or impacting water treatment. And so there's costs associated with that. So that's kind of where my mind's at when trying to track accomplishments for water, but it's been tough. So I'll definitely check out I made a note, the Pillars of Resilience. Is that right? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions?
I'm just very curious to follow your efforts and see where you go and how you solve some of the challenges that we've had. In addition to being in touch with you in the state of Washington, I know there's also federal efforts to get this done through the National Association of State Foresters, and we've been having conversations with Timmins, the contractor on who's organizing that effort.
Okay.
Question, Amanda?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Amanda West-Fordham, I'm the Associate Director of Science and Data at the Colorado State Forest Service. And I'm curious, and you might not be prepared to answer this, and if you're not and you want to follow up in an email, that's fine. But I'm curious, based on your experience so far, if you have an estimate of what type of FTE it requires kind of on a yearly basis to sustain the dashboard, provide user and stakeholder support, data cleaning, QA, QC, that type of thing. If you had like a kind of a broad estimate based on your experience so far, that would be helpful.
There are different ways to answer that. So a lot of the work that we've been doing so far has been supported by a contract to a third-party group that's so like handling all the GIS processing for us and doing the computer coding and stuff like that to process the data. They've developed Python scripts to pull the data from the Forest Service and other sources into a unified database and crosswalk that all. We also have kind of layers of tracking that are happening. So we have this task force system that pulls in state and federal and private data. CAL FIRE, we've had our own database for a number of years, not as long as the Forest Service has been doing that. So we have our own internal staff to do that. What hadn't existed until about a year ago is treatment tracking for other state agencies that are involved in land management, including state parks and Department of Fish and Wildlife, which I think manage each around 1 million acres of land within the state. And then there's all that other long list of conservancies and other departments that have a land management role in California as well. And those organizations have different levels of sophistication. You know, state parks and Department of Fish and Wildlife are complex organizations with thousands of employees that have GIS staff. Some of the conservancies have literally 3 people. They have an executive director, an admin person, and an environmental scientist. So they don't have a GIS shop. So we, like you were saying earlier in the call before I started, had to build a system, a front end for them to put in their data where they could draw a polygon and attribute it and provide data to us in a way that matched our scheme. So we had like one FTE who was building that system. We had the contractor who's doing all the data wrangling. We had, you know, my time and a couple of others sort of working part-time, and I wasn't full-time on this, but I was you know, writing point and herding cats and things like that, and handling all the political issues, which were, I think, harder than the technical issues, and getting this resolved. And then, you know, sort of layered within that are GIS staff at the various agencies. So I couldn't give you a like comprehensive number of how many people are involved in this effort overall. Our contractor has varying numbers of people involved. There's one person full-time that they have on this, and they get help as needed from a couple of other people. We're trying to figure out how to staff this to sustain the system going forward. We've made it basically an essential system because we have so many other products that are going to rely on it, and it's our tool for transparency and tracking progress towards these very politically important goals in the state. And now we need to figure out like what are the permanent staff resources that we need to sustain it. And we're thinking probably at least 5. Just sort of at the interagency level, you know, sort of apart from what additional staff might be needed in those smaller, you know, agencies that are feeding data into the system.
Great, thank you. Yeah, those are all challenges we're certainly familiar with, so I really appreciate that perspective. Thank you.
Other questions for Alan? Yes, Katie.
I was just wondering what were some of those key political issues that you mentioned, and how did you ultimately overcome those?
Key political issues. So, I mean, one was like the seemingly very benign, like what is a year, was a political issue. There's an issue of like, what types of activities are we actually counting here? We decided that as a task force, made some decisions about like, we're going to count this type of forest management, but not this other type of forest management. Specifically, we are not counting even age forms of management, so clear cutting and other things like that kind of look like clear cutting, which is not to say that like that is not a form of management that doesn't have its place, but we decided for the purpose of wildfire and forest resilience, it wasn't an activity that like we could make the blanket statement that it would contribute to wildfire and forest resilience. There are other things that are challenging, which is like, how do you define prescribed burning? Do you count pile burning as a prescribed fire, or do you not count it as prescribed fire? And there are like different opinions among different landowners and stakeholders within the state. You know, like the Forest Service is very much like, yes, that is a prescribed fire. We have to staff that and monitor it, and it's fire going on the landscape. Whereas someone like our Air Resources Board is like, no, that's not prescribed fire. It doesn't have the same sort of landscape benefits as other things. That's really just waste disposal that you're doing via combustion. You know, it's while it just does take firefighters there, like the operational effect of that is not any different than you taking that to a landfill or, you know, like chipping it and leaving it on the ground to some extent. So like, and do we count things like ecological restoration or so revegetation and habitat restoration, things that stream restoration and things like that? Like, so those are the conversations that we had to have around like what counts, whose work counts, and whose work we should be tracking has also been a part of the conversation. The utilities in California spend billions on wildfire mitigation. easily over $10 billion a year on that. A lot of that is vegetation management. It's not all vegetation management. Some of it is, infrastructure hardening and undergrounding of wires and stuff like that. But they have a very extensive database. But what they give us is actually individual trees that they've trimmed, individual like power line poles that they've brushed around and things like that. So it's millions of data points, but it's not in acres. And it's kind of hard to integrate into your planning. So ultimately we decided like that wasn't going to be counted towards our goals. We still have those data and we'll be sharing those data so people can use them for planning and environmental assessment. But in terms of like, does it count as an acre treated towards our state goals? Ultimately, we decided that no, it didn't. A thing that we haven't really resolved yet is what we're going to do with tribal data. Tribes are an important land manager in California, but they are oftentimes reluctant to provide their data to us, particularly around activity that they're doing related to cultural heritage, cultural burning and other things like that. They don't necessarily want to tell the public or land management agencies, the government, who have historically mistreated them, what they're doing and why they're doing it. So we haven't really resolved that question yet. But that I think will be something that we do have to solve as we pull their data into the system. So those have been some of the political issues that we've had to deal with. It's mostly like what you count and then how you count it. And even do we track progress towards our goal in the activity that we're doing or the geography of what we're doing? Ultimately, where we landed was the geography, because we felt like that was more consistent with the stakeholder and public expectation for what we're doing. That they didn't necessarily care how many times we had to go to an acre. They just wanted to know how many acres we touched. But that was something that we had to decide because that wasn't defined when that goal was outlined. The goal just said do 1 million acres a year. It didn't say what was going to be included in that or how you were going to count towards that or anything like that. So that's been a point of discussion as well with the state and the federal government. Clyde?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you handled tracking home hardening in the WUI.
That's a thing that we haven't gotten to yet. We do have some data on that. It's not displayed on the dashboard. We don't have it comprehensively tracked yet. And I think that's going to be something that is challenging because there can be privacy issues around that. People don't necessarily want to reveal that information. Privacy information has been somewhat of a concern so far. Like we tried to get data from the NRCS, but they, under statute, can't share their data in a public way. They can't reveal which landowners they're working with. It's in the Farm Bill. So it's possible we'll be able to sign an agreement with them to have their data sort of on a confidential basis, but then we wouldn't be able to distribute it and really share it. And so it's not been really a priority for us to get that worked out. But yeah, home hardening is certainly going to be a challenge for us going forward, as well as defensible space. The state, CAL FIRE, is responsible for defensible space inspections in a large part of the state. Those areas of the state not under federal control or local jurisdiction. And there is tracking of that in a separate database. But we would have to, I think really hard about the extent to which we would want to make that public and what the trade-offs would be.
Thank you.
Now, if you solve that question, I'd love to hear how you do it too.
Too many polygons to track.
Yeah.
Brett, any thoughts, especially around or questions just around how to motivate people to provide the data?
No, I think we had some good ideas earlier. I'm curious, Alan, your perspective. It seems similar. There's some that are accessible to you and some you have to really work to get. I'll just share, we've had similar experiences even within the various state agencies, that some state agencies in Colorado and Nick has led this effort for us at the State Forest Service, just send data right over, and others are like, we don't have polygons for anything we've ever done, and so yeah, I don't know how. One other thing is we're trying to get data. We were hoping from like the year 2000 forward, and I noticed on the California dashboard right now you only have, I think, the last 1 year of data in there. So I assume your hope is to eventually add more data beyond that, passing the record, but
Yeah.
there's all these other complexities about when you're asking people for data, how much and where and what.
Yeah, it's really hard to go back in time because people don't have the resources, the capacity to do it. They probably don't have the information. A lot of the work that gets done in California gets done through grants, and if you didn't write that type of reporting into your grant agreements when you signed the grant agreement, then it's really hard to go back to that grantee and say, "Oh, we need this additional thing for you." It's going to cost that grantee some staff resource time to be able to pull that information together, and so that may not be within the bounds. So we actually have some data gaps on the state side that are related to that, where, we've created this reporting system and, it's been built over the last year and a half or so. But the grants that existed prior to that, we just don't have any information. We don't really have an expectation that we're going to get that. We have a sort of different example of that is we have a really good data from the transportation department. They've treated 160,000 acres last year, but they have no idea what they did before that. They have no database from before that. That 1 year of data we have from them is great. It's really exhaustive, and they probably treated a lot of those same acres before just because of the nature of the work that they need to do in terms of, herbicides and roadside vegetation management and other things like that they do. But we don't have documentation of that, and so we're sort of limited on how far back in time that we can go. The federal data sets go back the farthest. We'll probably eventually provide those in their entirety, but it's going to be a dynamic process. And it's been really interesting to learn about the strengths and weaknesses of even the federal government in terms of the autonomy that individual national forests have in providing their data and entering it into the FACTS database. It seems like everything gets entered into the FACTS database for the most part when it's done, but we were really interested in planning data, and that seems really inconsistent from forest to forest from what we've seen. And while the region is really great in trying to provide leadership and trying to get all the forests to be rowing in the same direction, they don't have the sticks, I think, available to them to be able to do that. And it's also been really important that we've had really high level political support. This has been a priority of the governor, it's been a priority of the Secretary of Natural Resources. And so that's been a big force in making this happen. We're 6 years into the term of the current administration. And so what happens when this administration times out in 2026? Unclear whether the next governor picks this up and makes it as much of a priority. I think it'll depend a lot on how much wildfire activity that there has been. We've been slammed in California. We had 4 million acres of fire in 2020 and 2 million acres almost in 2021. So who knows how this will play out in the future if it keeps getting the same amount of attention that it's been getting.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alan. I think, we're kind of out of time, so just kind of wrap up. Really thank you for coming and just share, our forest tracker. The ball has been rolling for, I would say, 1.5 years or so. Initial conversations with CFRI and the State Forest Service. And so we had a lot of the same visions, and we're really excited when your dashboard came out, / also a little disappointed because we envisioned something very similar. And we're like, darn it, California beat us. But thank you for laying the groundwork. And just for other members on the council, I think we are envisioning something pretty similar and really like how you display your data as far as activity versus the geography and those kind of metrics and being able to talk about it. So I think for members of the council, just really think about how we could use this, right, to leverage resources. And Alan gave a lot of great examples of monitoring, informing planning, informing grants and agreements, and all those kind of things. So hopefully that's some of the conversations we can continue to have after we're learning from Utah, what they're working on. California sounds like maybe we should get in touch with Washington. There's lots of other people working on this across the country. So
Yeah, Clyde.
Yeah, I just want to say, Alan, thank you very much. Really informative. One thing that I'm interested in, you've got some state people and you've got some county commissioners in the meeting here. And one of the things as a county commissioner I'm interested in is if there are any legislative or statutory roadblocks that prevent the sharing. And we need to kind of highlight those things and see if they're curable. I mean, we want to facilitate this process and you need supporters to do that. So I guess from this group, that's what I'm interested in too. It's not just the technology, which is really slick. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to follow up with any of you, however you're interested in doing that.
Thank you, Alan. Well, we are at time. Thank you so much for your time and sharing. We really appreciate it. I'll be reaching out in the meantime, maybe to get a copy of your presentation if you're willing to share that, but I'll coordinate offline.
Sure.
And then Brett, I'll work with Courtney, hopefully to get some time on the upcoming January Forest Health Council meeting to discuss our forest tracker and how we can support that. So, well, thank you all so much, and happy holidays if I don't talk to you before then. Otherwise, I'll see you in January for our next committee meeting. I believe it's January 8th for the subcommittee for this committee, and then we have the Forest Health Council meeting in January as well. So thanks all. Have a good one.
Thank you.
thanks.